Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the second day of the conference. By all accounts, yesterday was quite an invigorating experience. At least it was for me and from the many that I've spoken to last night. And we're looking forward to a similar experience today. So with that, let me hand you over to Thabo, who will take us through the rest of the session. Thank you very much.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're very excited this morning to be introducing an eminent scholar, Professor Willem Pinar, somebody who's influenced my work quite tremendously. In fact, in 2007, when I went to the United States to pursue my master's, I was given a course exclusively looking at his work, and his work has influenced much of my research and what I do in the present day moment, so I'm quite honored. I'm also honored that this morning we have two DVCs seated here today attending. We've got the DVC for Teaching and Learning, who was here yesterday, Professor Renuka Vithal, and then we've got the DVC of the College of Humanities and the head of the college, Professor Cheryl Potgieter, both seated here in front of us. I want to say that it's very rare for a young scholar like myself to be given an opportunity to introduce a scholar of Professor Pinar's standing. I'm therefore quite humbled to introduce to you somebody that can be labeled with ease as the father of curriculum theory in the present day moment. Professor Pinar is an eminent scholar of note, an intellectual whose accomplishments span for decades. He resuscitated curriculum theory at the time when it was rendered dead and led a call with a group of critical scholars to reconceptualize curriculum. Professor Pinar is a pioneer whose work continues to shape the imaginations of many curriculum scholars across the globe. He was born in Huntington, West Virginia in 1947, where he took his BSc in education at The Ohio State University, graduating in 1969. He taught English at the Paul D. Schreiber High School in Port Washington, Long Island, New York in 1969 to 1971, returning to Ohio State to finish his MA in 1970 and then the PhD in 1972. He taught at the University of Rochester from 1972 until 1985, when he moved to Louisiana State University and where he taught until 2005, when he accepted a Canada Research Chair at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. And just to note that this is a federally funded chair, signaling the standing that Professor Pinar enjoys. Pinar is served at the St. Bernard Parish Alumni Endowment Professor at LSU, the Frank Talbot Professor at the University of West Virginia, and the A. Lindsay O'Connor Professor at the Professor of American Institutions at Colgate University. He has lectured widely, including at Beijing Normal University, East China Normal University, Hangzhou Normal University, Harvard University, the Hong Kong Institute of Education, Indiana University, McGill University, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, as well as the Universities of Chicago, Dublin, Helsinki, Lisbon. I can mention a number of universities, and all these universities are highly, highly regarded institutions. In 2013, he presented a keynote address at the inaugural meeting of the European Association for Curriculum Studies. He has also made keynote addresses at national and international conferences in Australia, Brazil, Canada, Chile, China, France, Israel, Mexico, Norway, Romania, South Africa, South Korea, Turkey, and the United States. The former president of the International Association of the Advancement of Curriculum Studies and the founder of its U.S. affiliate, the American Association for the Advancement of Curriculum Studies, in 2000, Pinar received the LSU Distinguished Faculty Award and a Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Educational Research Association. In 2004, he received an American Educational Association Award for the an Outstanding Book Award for What is Curriculum Theory, the second edition of which was published in 2012 by Routledge. In 2013, he was honored by LSU with the naming of a conference room after him, and his colleague and co-director of LSU Curriculum Theory Project, William E. Dole Jr. And he also had the establishment of the William F. Pinar Archive at the LSU Library. Pinar is a distinguished scholar who has edited more than 20 books, some of which include Curriculum Studies in South Africa by Palgrave Macmillan in 2010, Curriculum Studies in Brazil, Curriculum Studies in Mexico, both published by Palgrave and Macmillan in 2011, Curriculum Studies in China, which is in press, the International Handbook of Curriculum Research, and numerous other books which I will not mention. I'm honored to indicate to you that Professor Pinar has accepted an honorary full professorship which has been granted to him by the College of Humanities here at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. We're very happy that he has accepted this, and we're honored to be associated with a scholar such as Professor Pinar. I'm sure you don't want to see me standing up in front telling you about him. You want to hear more from the man. So ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big round of applause and welcome Professor Pinar.
It's my privilege to be here this morning and to have this opportunity to speak with you. I start with a line from one of your own colleagues, Labi Ramthan. He wrote in 2012, "We are currently in a curriculum craze in South Africa." Focusing on the Council of Higher Education, the CHE discussion proposal, undergraduate curriculum reform in South Africa, the case for a flexible curriculum structure, and referencing both the UK ZN faculty response and curriculum studies in South Africa, a project focused on the history and present state of curriculum research and development in South Africa. I consider briefly the question of undergraduate curriculum reform, asking about its relation to national history, culture, and globalization. Because this multivariate context seems crucial in comprehending what is at stake in curriculum reform, one element, such as structure, cannot, I suggest, be cast as the key contributor to educational accomplishment. After critiquing the proposal, its ahistorical, neoliberal, systemic inflexibility, propelled by evidence-less assertions, are among its self-negating features, I will question the UK ZN response as well, specifically its embrace of skills over specifically canonical or Western knowledge. Isn't the emphasis on skills itself an expression of modernity's obsessions with instrumentality and functionality that make working through the colonial and apartheid past impossible? Why invoke what seems now an inflationary rhetoric calling for emancipatory higher education when the very minimal practices of academic integrity itself, that is, faculty control over the curriculum, including its duration and assessment, are at stake in this proposal? Why make that concessionary note? I'm still referencing the UK ZN response. Why make that concessionary note about with proper management the CHE proposal could be implemented? After praising the UK ZN endorsement of institutional autonomy, I would have hoped to read as well an endorsement of individual faculty autonomy as well. Its critique of commodification, its affirmation of indigenous languages and knowledges, and its cautionary note concerning South Africa's systemic K-12 school reform, about which I learned much from the Curriculum Studies in South Africa project. I conclude with concepts from curriculum research and development in South Africa and elsewhere that could contribute to a reconceptualization of the question of undergraduate curriculum reform. The CHE proposal. I'd like to start with a line from Crane Sudin, also from 2010. He wrote, "The racialization of power is important to study precisely because of its changing morphology." What prompted this proposal? We are told, quoting from it, the South African higher education system is currently producing too few graduates, both in absolute numbers and relative to intake, and that there are mismatches between current graduate attributes and the broader needs of society and the economy, close quote. But evidence could have been helpful here. 10-year-old data are referenced but not cited, so we're unable to see for ourselves. Also helpful here would have been a definition. What exactly is mismatch? What constitutes then, who decides, the, quote, broader needs of society and the economy? That adjective, broader before society, implies cultural, perhaps psychological, no doubt historical needs that certain academic disciplines, in the arts, humanities, and interpretive social sciences, by their very nature, are more likely to address than are the natural sciences or vocational training, from which the examples provided in the proposal derive. Even the broader needs of the economy, innovation, creativity, so-called world-class research, may also require sustained study in the liberal arts, a point to which I'll return in the conclusion. Not an immediate funneling into disciplinary functionality and instrumentality. That is, as Youssef Wagid notes, quoting him, learning associated with consumerist logic consigns the teacher-student relationship as one between a customer and a supplier, with the replacement of students with customers and educators by suppliers. Education ends. The other apparent prompt for this report's series of declarations is what the authors term a major fault line, quoting a discontinuity between school and undergraduate studies in higher education, referred to in this report as an articulation gap. Evidently, having abandoned hope for improving the public schools, the authors of this proposal want to close this gap on the university side. Before returning to the concept of gap, I want to raise two questions about the references to K-12 education. Dysfunction is one term used in the report to describe its present state, followed by the declaration that there is no prospect that schooling will, quote, produce the numbers of well-prepared matriculants that higher education requires. Is that the only point of schooling in South Africa? Preparation for university study? If post-secondary school destinations are not only the university, as the proposal complains, why would the point of K-12 schooling be the production of well-prepared matriculants? Why is there no acknowledgement of the multiplicity of civic and personal purposes of elementary and secondary education? Even focused on this one purpose and concerning the allegation, the absence of well-prepared matriculants, where's the evidence? Are there no superb schools in South Africa? The authors of the UK's ZN response also characterize the entire spectrum of South African schools in this sweeping and dismissive fashion. South African schools, they claim, increasingly weak. They say, quoting the response, a moral responsibility to communicate with the colleagues in schools that in the basic education sector that there is, quoting, a limit to what can be achieved with significant numbers of grossly underprepared students, close quote. In this language, they accept the deficit model they elsewhere denounce. There is little or no evidence elsewhere in the world, the authors of the UK ZN response conclude, of a good higher education system resting on a very weak basic education system, close quote. May I point out that while a majority of the top 25 universities in the world are often listed as being in the United States, the school system in the United States has been declared weak since the Sputnik satellite in 1957. 26 years later, in 1983, it was pronounced by a presidential commission as being so weak as to be placing the nation at risk. Evidently, superb universities do not require a strong basic education sector. Sidestepping such questions on the politics of curriculum reform, the authors of the CHE proposal emphasize this articulation gap as indicated in low graduation rates. There is considerable attention given to this problem, but only passing reference to its possible but clearly multiple causes. Among them, quoting from the proposal, subject knowledge, but also academic skills and literacies, such as quantitative, language-related, and information literacies, approaches to study, background or contextual knowledge, and forms of social capital, close quote. In another paragraph, the authors then dismiss obvious candidates for underperformance. Among them, student deficits, poor teaching, even sweepingly, quoting again, effective or material factors, and conclude that, quoting, underperformance must be systemic in origin. That's quote. Given the plurality and complexity of causes the authors of the report themselves cite, it's not likely it could be only systemic, internal to the universities. At one point, the authors assure us that, quoting them again, all signs that the fundamental problem is systemic, that is institutional, rather than a result of student deficits, but we are never shown these signs. Indeed, there is no data, as the authors admit, quoting, the sector-wide information currently available is not able to accurately identify the reasons for voluntary dropout, but data such as course success rates and institutional exclusion patterns indicate that poor academic performance affects very large numbers of students, especially in SET programs. Sounds like circular reasoning to me. Despite the absence of data and the author's own admission of the complexity of the problem, the solution is obvious to them. Quoting, the factor that the investigation has focused on is the structure of South Africa's undergraduate curricula rather than issues of content and canon, close quote. And even more narrowly, the solution is, quoting again, creating additional curriculum space for strengthening and enhancing learning in mainstream undergraduate provision, close quote. Later, they acknowledge, quoting, structural curriculum reform is, of course, not a complete response to the challenge of improving graduate output and outcomes, but it can be expected to make a positive difference in itself, as well as facilitating effective practice in other fundamental elements of the teaching learning process, close quote. If that's hedging your bets, of course reform is not a complete response. You're not taking any money off the table with that promissory note. How can, quoting, using their phrase, affective and material factors be dismissed out of hand? The authors acknowledge their significance when they reference, quoting, a growing body of research, in particular in the form of local and international retention studies, which indicates that success and failure in higher education is the result of a complex interplay of factors. These factors are both internal, that is intrinsic to the higher education system, and external in relation to social, cultural, and material circumstances, close quote. The two domains, hardly of equal weight, I should think, are surely interrelated. But in the CHE proposal, they are simply set aside, quoting, addressing material disadvantage is not a substitute for dealing effectively with the academic and other factors impacting on student progression, close quote. No substitute, of course. But can they be set aside? What occurs in this document is the substitution of curriculum change for economic intervention, displacing the obligations of government and the private sector onto what I suspect are already overburdened universities. The CHE definition of curriculum structure is certainly expansive, including, quoting, parameters of starting level and related assumptions about students' prior knowledge, duration, the pace and flexibility of progression pathways, and exit level, close quote. Prior knowledge is acknowledged, but strangely not present knowledge, the very formal, the author's adjective, curriculum of the university study, the curriculum with which some struggle. Despite this diffuse definition, curriculum structure, we are advised, quoting, is a key framework that enables or constrains effective teaching and learning in higher education. Again, no evidence or argument is provided, simply assertion. Undeterred, the authors proceed. In summary, they inform the reader, the available evidence suggests that structural curriculum reform that takes account of students' educational backgrounds can positively influence student performance. One wonders what taking account of students' educational backgrounds means. If the evidence is available, why not make it available in this proposal? Without evidence or explanation, the authors continue with what reads more and more like a conceptual Ponzi scheme, quoting, because of current constraints, however, the educational advantages underlying extended curriculum provision will not be fully realized until they are fully integrated into an enabling curriculum structure and are available to large numbers of students who are talented but not coping with traditional curricula. This report argues that it is time for structural curriculum reform to be applied systemically. We are told that the term curriculum is used here refers primarily to the formal curriculum, that is, the planned learning experiences that students are exposed to, with a view to achieving desired outcomes in terms of knowledge, competencies, and attributes. The emphasis on outcomes and outputs confines the proposal to instrumentalism, not inspiration, while in accord with many initiatives advocated not only but especially by the World Bank, which has enforced its economistic conception of education. Such an authoritarian emphasis seems striking, given the history of racial exploitation in South Africa. While constantly cast in the rhetoric of equity, in the US especially, such rhetoric conceals the continuing commodification of the black body as significant only in economic terms. Such stipulation recapitulates, not reconstructs, the legacies that the lives of too many in South Africa suffer today. Questions of context aside, an emphasis on outcomes and outputs over inputs, over the quality of academic knowledge and the intellectual sophistication of those who teach it, condemns higher education to presentistic accounts of what society, in this proposal, as in many, it is the economy that is the tail wagging the dog, requires. Education provides passages to futures we cannot in principle foresee, if with the considerable exception of climate change. And even there, given the failures of government and business, the fate of humanity may hinge on educators' and researchers' capacities to craft solutions to problems that are escalating into intractability. Declaring the South African nation as, quote, entering the second stage of its historic new life, we are told in the proposal that the future keeps receding due to a murky and unfocused present severely lacking in human capacity, close quote. In that last phrase is the deficit model the UK ZN response discerned, not only a covert racialization of national failure, but an outright displacement of the responsibilities of government and business for job creation, job training, and wage growth. For the cultural crisis produced by the failures of government and business, organized religion or the court system cannot be exempt from any comprehensive critique of South African society. We must rely on artists, public intellectuals, and cultural critics, none of whose work or academic preparation is acknowledged, let alone supported, in the CHE proposal. The undergraduate curriculum, we are reminded in the proposal, is closer to career systems and life orientation, a point made in the surface of emphasizing the decisiveness of the curriculum in the life of nations. Crafting a life orientation, a vague phrase that seems to reference how decisive this experience can be for students, would seem to support studying the liberal arts, not remedial education. In Canada and in the United States, for the elite, the significance of the liberal arts, by which I mean the arts, the fine arts, the humanities, and the interpretive social sciences, has historically been acknowledged as appropriate regardless of the vocational destination the student has in mind. The idea remains, barely, alive today, as I'll note at the end. The problem the proposal confronts is not the cultural crisis it referenced in passing, the disappointed dream, the future receding, but its symptoms, increased access to higher education, but, quote, high attrition and low graduation rates. This output, we are told, has not kept pace with the country's needs. That momentous phrase, the country's needs, calls for clarification. Are labor shortage statistics in the author's minds? If so, those would not be sufficient, as any list of the nation's needs must be composed by representatives of the nation as a whole, including the impoverished. But I suspect the nation's needs are in fact incidental here, as the authors take aim at the hunted game, quoting, "The conditions on the ground dictate a fundamental systemic review of the undergraduate curriculum." Undergraduate curriculum review is ongoing, but any systemic review of the nation's needs must also include a systemic review of government, business, the courts, and the church. If it were truly the needs of the nation that had been the animus for this proposal, a more systemic review would have indeed been the outcome, not the identification of a lever, by which the failures of government, business, the courts, and the church can be corrected and the nation raised. These august institutional sectors of South African society are evidently marginal to the task at hand. It is the reform of the undergraduate curriculum that will restore the promise of the nation. And through, quote, more program time, more flexibility, more system self-awareness, more rigor and steadfastness, adding that the true transformation will occur in the field of teaching itself, quote. The proposal might be seen to be placing university teachers on a pedestal here. After all, they are ascribing to them powers evidently unavailable to elected officials, business executives, judges, and priests. But they are clearly not looking up at educators, but down. Educators are capable, no, they are responsible for doing what no other group of professionals has managed to accomplish, even the priesthood with presumably God on their side. Yes, we are told the onus is on higher education institutions not only to correct the injustices of the apartheid past, but to address the opportunities and threats posed by, quote, global demands. After setting up the university faculty for the fall, the proposal authors sidestepped the professors to name the corrective curriculum structure. Curriculum structure is, we are told, a key element of the teaching and learning process, and so we must consider the desirability and feasibility of amending it as a means of substantially improving graduate output and outcomes. The indefinite Article A suggests there are other key elements, but these are left unspecified. There are two reasons provided for this focus, the first of which is systemic obstacles to access and success, for which evidence has accumulated. Apparently, this is common knowledge, as no evidence is presented. Second, the current curriculum structure is a century old, adopted during the colonial era, constituting prima facie justification for a review. Evidently, what was appropriate for the children of the colonial elite is inappropriate for the masses today. Assertions without evidence are combined with self-contradiction, the endorsement simultaneously of flexibility and inflexibility. Quoting the report makes a concrete proposal for a flexible curriculum structure for South Africa's core undergraduate qualifications based on extending their formal time by a year as the norm. In what sense does decreeing an extension of program time by 1 year as the norm constitute a flexible curriculum structure? Evidently overlooking this self-refuting statement, the proposal cautions that moving from the current rigid curriculum structure to another rigid one would not satisfactorily address the diversity that will continue to characterize the student body. In this last paragraph, there is mention of, quote, provision for shorter pathways within the new norms, but these are not specified. Indeed, the demand for increased duration is repeated. There is reference to local and global conditions, but these two are never specified. There is a nod to the idea that education could have intrinsic value. Quoting, the task team recognizes that completing a higher education qualification is likely to have value beyond the instrumental, close quote. Although that acknowledgement seems to be the end of it. That the value of higher education is now instrumental, indeed exclusively vocational, is implied by this statement that consigns all such value as beyond. For me, it is the value of education, a long-term, big-picture view of what we face as an endangered species. Never mind the big picture, let us return to graduation rates. No doubt there are steps universities can take. These are the factors within the sector's control, I'm quoting, that can make a significant difference to higher education output and outcomes, as the authors phrase it. There are steps that various universities may in fact already be taking, but these are not cited. The authors ignore the obvious ones: expanded tutoring programs, increased financial assistance, more social support, including peer support groups, academic, psychological, and career counseling. But instead focus on one, undergraduate curriculum structure. There is some definitional dancing, curriculum time, curriculum space, but the authors fasten their attention on structural, not social or specifically racially related impediments to student success. Why? Another assumption expressed in this proposal that represents consensus thinking is a causal relationship between Participation rates, we're told the highest in sub-Saharan Africa, but below those of Latin America and Central Asia. And social and economic development, a phrase denoting a broader set of issues and concerns that disappear in the phrase that follows it, the shortage of high-level skills. Which high-level skills exactly are short supply? Relying exclusively on what is supplied in the proposal, it turns out they're not so broad at all, restricted to science, engineering, and technology, as well as those taught in professional programs. When engineering shortages loomed in the United States a decade ago, immigration was increased. Is that not possible in South Africa? Why is Pretoria's only policy option manipulating the undergraduate curriculum that, even if it were in time successful, would surely constitute a slow motion response to real-time labor shortages? What social development did the authors have in mind? Does that not require what in North America we term the liberal arts, studies in the arts, humanities, and social sciences that contribute to the formation of the civic social subject? Embedded in that vague phrase, social development, could be equity and social cohesion, two concepts the authors link with the undergraduate curriculum, insofar as its reform will lead to economic development, another assumption, no documented fact. Surely equity and social cohesion are not so easily achieved, although admittedly their absence might become more tolerable amidst an equitably distributed national prosperity. But their causes and consequences are among the investigations university scholars could continue to conduct research in the humanities, arts, and social sciences. Construing education, whether K through 12 or higher education, as the engine of the economy and the medium of reparation for historical trauma and injury inflates the promise of curriculum while distorting its achievements. Understanding these calamities and their legacies, we scholars can study, but not solve, and certainly not alone. Imagining that the manipulation of one variable, however vague that variable is, segregates the responsibility and misunderstands its nature. It is the liberal arts that address questions of history, culture, and post-colonial experience. These enjoy little attention in the present proposal. After decreeing the new and flexible curriculum structure, the authors dissimulate once again, declaring that, quote, none of the accountability measures outlined above will infringe on institutional autonomy. Institutions will continue to be free to design their curricula within the nationally adopted framework, as is the case at present. What exactly is institutional autonomy if the nationally adopted framework structures it? Once again, the authors are undeterred, quoting them. In fact, the strength of the flexible curriculum structure is the opportunities it gives to institutions to design curricula that suit their particular student profile and institutional mission, without the counterproductive constraint of the current rigid structure and subsidy system that are not sensitive to differentials in students' educational backgrounds, close quote. The idea of local control in institutions historically identified with apartheid cannot be entirely reassuring, but it is the doublethink of this proposal I am highlighting here, not its recoded racialized meanings, a project requiring more intimacy with the South African situation than I have. How, with a straight face, however, can officials and colleagues claim the following, quoting, valuing institutions' disciplinary and local knowledge, contextual awareness, and creativity should therefore be a key element of implementation strategy, close quote. Implementation means compliance to an enforced policy. By definition, implementation confines contextual awareness and creativity to the execution of that policy. In this shorter section, I examine the UK ZN response and start with a line from Leslie LaGrange. New ways of living are not to be found in returning to values of the past, nor in replacing existing models with new ones, but rather in seeing current events as bearers of alternative constellations. Like the CHE proposal, the UKZN response demonstrates little interest in evidence and argument, perhaps due to time, perhaps due to lack of faculty consensus. It does seem to hedge its bets, although the faculty are also affirming a confidence similar to that expressed in the epigraph, namely that they can rework present circumstances to find passages to a future that seem currently blocked, at least in part. It is clear by now, oh really? Well, then I'll skip my consideration of the response. I'm happy to share it with you via email and go to my conclusion. And the conclusion, I start with another line from Crane Sudin. Education, he writes, was and still is, in the context of the evolving colonial landscape, a violent process involving the fundamental displacement of local knowledges and local identities. The CHE proposal concludes with an endorsement of curriculum development, if in the service of its scheme. Curriculum development is an ongoing faculty project, an intellectual undertaking, not an organizational restructuring or bureaucratic manipulation. In general, it is best relegated to experts in the various academic disciplines and professional fields who work together on shared problems, to degree requirements, for instance. But also, let it be noted, work alone, as they individually restructure the content and format of their courses, preparing for participation in the complicated conversation that is the curriculum. That conversation can proceed, as not only the Bernsteinian view indicates, from the simple to the complex, but it can incorporate juxtaposition, wherein conceptual scales are complicated and sometimes harmonized by their dissonance. Curriculum development is a creative, contextualized endeavor, informed by expertise and consultation, not dictated by definition. Rather than assigning faculty bureaucratic busywork, retitling courses and rescheduling their sequencing, they can, in ongoing conversation with each other and students, make these adjustments. I recommend that the government provide more funding in order to increase considerably the number of faculty. More professors means more funding for research, more funding for reduced teaching loads, extended sabbatical leaves. As establishing world-class universities while working with students who struggle with what they study takes time, probably much time, as does conducting important research that not only raises the academic profile of South African universities, but contributes to the intellectual sophistication of the curriculum that the professors can offer the students with whom they work. The problem of low graduation rates is part of a much larger parcel, one sent to you from the past, and containing residues of colonialism and apartheid that cannot be sidestepped by tinkering with curriculum structures. The inconvenient and expensive truth is that low graduation rates at universities or in the public school system cannot be solved by manipulating one variable or two or even three in a country whose present continued to be structured by the legacies of its past manipulation is not the appropriate action of government at all. Support, financial first of all, is. Supported would be an acknowledgement by members of the Council on Higher Education that the problems of the present follow from the past, problems that require a critical and cosmopolitan curriculum that addresses that past, the presence of the past in contemporary South Africa. Such a curriculum requires knowledge as well as skills and sustained study of the liberal arts, emphasizing indigenous knowledges in juxtaposition with inherited European traditions, including their violent intersections, that perhaps an undergraduate academic version of people's education promises the passage from the past to the future the authors of the CHE proposal and the citizens of South Africa seek. Addressing the complexity of the South African present is provocation for national curriculum reform led by faculty, focused on reparation, on education that discloses the persistence of the past and the present, not recrimination, but if still real, unrealized reconciliation that sustained academic study and subjective and social reconstruction invite. Teachers, Michael Roth reminds, quoting him, don't just impart skills for a specific task. They also guide students to think allegorically and to puzzle out the diverse ways through which people give significance to their lives. He quotes William James, the 19th century American psychologist, education, enlarging as it does our horizon and perspective, is a means for multiplying our ideas of bringing new ones into view. James Roth underscored that, quoting, looking for the whole inward significance of another's situation is a crucial dimension of any inquiry that takes us beyond the comfortable borders of our own insular groups. Teaching is neither preaching to the choir nor energizing a base of believers. It is such an historically informed, socially focused undergraduate curriculum reform, simultaneously structured horizontally and vertically in Bernsteinian terms, animated by reparation, that South African faculty might undertake. They might modify curriculum structures, but remain, I recommend, focused on academic knowledge and its communication in complicated conversation with students struggling with the specialized languages expertise requires. It matters what you know, not only what you can do, as the latter follows from and is embedded in the former. Without expertise, skill is an empty concept, a slogan now complicit with corporate demands for a compliant workforce. There isn't sufficient awareness, Crane Sudine wrote, of how the curriculum provides the tools for the deconstruction of the totalizing colonial project, close quote, rather than yet another reiteration of that colonizing project, as the current CHE proposal threatens to be. The call for undergraduate curriculum reform could demonstrate the truth and timeliness of Sudine's sagacity. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Pinar, for that very interesting discussion. And I'm sure it's quite loaded, and there are lots of burning questions in the audience and commentary for Professor Pinar. I'd like to open an opportunity for you now to engage with the talk.
As you were talking about rethinking about the role of faculties in transforming or in developing curriculum. And I was just thinking about the history, the structure, thinking about what Professor Spivak was talking about yesterday, the cognitively damaged material. To what extent will it be possible in our context, in some universities, to restructure curriculum and to bring that culture within the faculty?
The study of historical trauma, including its manifold manifestations in the historical present, are available and could be enormously informative and helpful, I think, with working with students who embody some of those legacies and the damages of the violence of the past and the present, rather than worksheets or corporate-produced online curricular exercises in basic skills. Those can be taught through a more visceral, intellectual, engaged response with these manifold expressions and legacies. So for me, they're not. It's not a sharp divide between remedial education and reparative education, but the focus is on what we teach, not the exercise of skills that are decontextualized from lived experience and historical reality. I'm suggesting not that that the government fund these opportunities. No doubt universities are already engaged in these kind of activities, tutoring, and some of them there could be expanded and additional programs that address issues that students are facing. It's not clear from the proposal, and I don't think we can assume in the abstract what the multiple causes are of low graduation rates. George W. Bush demanded that American universities investigate their low graduation rates. And the provost at LSU appointed me to the 7-member committee with a rather large budget to interview thousands of students who were taking longer to graduate, who had dropped out. And what became quite clear was that there were multiple causes, many of which weren't academic. Some people fell in love and had children. Some people decided this wasn't for them after all. The biggest surprise we found were among the children of the economic elite. They delayed graduation so they could continue to be guaranteed purchase of student football tickets, which was the reduced likelihood as alumni. So yes, they were taking 7 and 8 years to get through, but quite deliberately so. It's Mardi Gras every year in Louisiana, and so the kids weren't eager to move on. So my point is that the dishonesty in the proposal, and perhaps it's quite innocent, is that that curriculum, by manipulating duration, that could function as a kind of lever to undo the legacies of the past, to address multiple causes that are not related to what teachers and universities are doing already. And that a more informed assessment of what's at stake in these issues requires more extensive research than's evident in the proposal. And the 45% graduation rate, again, compare it internationally. At the second tier state universities in the US, the graduation rate's 25%. Again, the causes are multiple. Some it's academic, lack of academic preparation, but it's also all life and people getting involved in all kinds of things. So again, it's too simplistic an assessment, and it's too simplistic a response. Yes, that's what I'm suggesting. But I'm not trying to add to the burden of your already overburdened budgets by saying, yes, you provide more tutoring. No, the government should provide more funding, and especially peer support of various kinds. Coupled with advanced undergraduates working, there are so many schemes that your own specific situations would make clear to you. And you could try one thing and then another, but to see if you could increase the graduation rates. The danger in all of this graduation rate demand, though, is great inflation and the demand on faculty to pass people through. The great danger is great inflation and the erosion of academic rigor and sustained study. Again, applying this business model, which Professor Spivak, I thought so casually and yet effectively dismantled yesterday. This slow cooking of the soul, not that one image suffices for the complexity and range of educational experience, but it's too simple an indicator of educational achievement.
I suppose you run the risk of taking one document and analyzing it in a decontextualized way in your response. So certainly, I think in your, of course, as academic exercise, one can take a single document and a single response to it and analyze it and find all the various kinds of implications. What I thought was implicit in your response was your own bias, which you didn't sort of maybe declare, and maybe let me just put it up front, that your view is that the liberal arts curriculum is in fact the answer, and that you speak against, however we define a curriculum that is structured and linked to professions. So I suppose one should, I just want to set that up first in saying it. Of course, and I don't want to defend the document because it's not my document or our university's document, and I have a critique, some of which you also indicate, of the document. But just to maybe say that I think that curriculum reform document has to be seen in the context of a range of other documents that have emerged, and it would be more helpful. I would be interested in your view, for example, if you read it against the National Development Plan, the white paper on higher education, etc. So that, because when in the South African context, the curriculum reform aspect, because you allude to the point about issues of finance, there's issues of residence, a whole range of issues that are being addressed elsewhere and in other. For example, we have at the moment also a review of the funding framework, which the document, of course, spends a lot of time speaking to, I would agree, rather than the content, because, of course, the increase of a year would have huge funding implications for institutions. So for me, I think that I would be interested to hear, and you raised only a few of that, given your wide experience of different contexts, and given what you maybe got a sense of the challenges of the South African context, which are not unlike other contexts, whether the solution you're suggesting, has it worked for the US? And I'm just trying to understand this. In the US, you have a different challenge of, let's say, youth unemployment from South Africa. And so if we were to take you seriously, that our undergraduate curriculum, for very good reason that you've argued about a liberal arts curriculum, in the end, will that increase our levels of poverty? So we can't escape that. No matter how hard we argue about what the curriculum should do, you have to engage those questions. Because, of course, we are producing graduates, and we are also, because after all, we are public institutions, and the university system of South Africa is largely publicly funded. So the question of, are we producing graduates who then remain unemployed, is something, as a university system, we have to directly grapple with. So I'm just trying to kind of take seriously what you're saying, and saying, if we were to listen to you, what would happen to us, I wonder?
Well, it would be the end of the world, apparently, and so I trust you won't. Do you want that?
Is it a direct follow-up, or should we sort of, okay.
So just quickly, I of course reject your characterization of my views as a prejudice. The liberal arts has an ancient and long-standing tradition, but it's exactly this idea that there is one solution. That yes, instead of structure, oh yes, right, teach philosophy and the arts and you're in the money. That kind of utopic, reductionistic thinking is what I'm rejecting. And so of course not, the liberal arts is not the answer, but my point is that poverty is reproduced by a neo-colonial commodification of the black body that teaches only basic skills and not higher order thinking. And that the opportunities for reflection and erudition and innovation and creativity that have always been reserved for the children of the elite ought to be offered as an opportunity for the children of all. And that occurs in the liberal arts, not in a narrow vocational training. Of course, if you're not interested in poetry and you just want to learn how to operate the machine, do it. And there should be those vocational curricular paths. But I'm simply suggesting that what we have here is a reinscription through its economistic emphasis and a suspicious absence of evidence or argument. And perhaps for you, that gets forgiven or explained in the context of these other documents. But they're asking you to change your curriculum duration on a document that simply can't stand on its own.
Can I take last hand? Last hand, Professor Potgieter. Unfortunately, I know there are several other hands. I would encourage you to engage Professor Pinar after the talk because we don't have time.
Professor Pinar, given that you are going to be a member of the College of Humanities, we welcome further engagement with you. What I have learned from your lecture this morning is that we in South Africa, probably when we write documents, we need to reference the other basket of documents. And because I think that is probably the shortcoming of the document, and I think that has probably led to the way in which you've interpreted let me just say, the approach. When you talk about a deficit model, I think that you've labeled it a deficit model. I will see it as a model that's contextualized and taking into account the deficit in a very realistic way. We at UKZN and many research universities in South Africa, we are at some level accused of not going the vocational route like some of the other universities that are not research-led. And the reason why we're going that route, because we believe that black bodies should not only do. In the apartheid state, black bodies were not recognized for being able to do, and at UKZN as a research-led institution, we have actually in the School of Education, we have argued theoretically as well as practically that our courses need to be geared towards a pipeline of master's and doctoral students. The world over, research indicates that if you have a large number of doctoral graduates, it impacts on the economy, but I'm not only arguing for a space where only about economic growth at the expense of transformation and really addressing the issue of the Gini coefficient. So my concern is that South Africa is complicated, and when we suggest recommendations and solutions, we need to take into account the complexity of the society. And yes, if we are serious about black bodies that are not going to only be bodies, but they're going to be thinkers as they weren't in apartheid, then we need to also understand that our solutions cannot be simplistic. So I believe what you are arguing for is actually the kind of intervention that UKZN and has argued for, and maybe the documents that you've seen are not that clear. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Professor Pinar very much for a very insightful talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill, for that. I should like to think that this is the beginning of a conversation. For the chunk of the paper that was not presented, you will have an opportunity to see it in a book which Michael Samuel and I will be editing based on the keynote speakers from this conference, together with commission papers from other international experts based on the themes of this conference. So look out for that.